Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin. If you step quietly into a forest at night, when the air is cool and the chorus of insects hums in the distance, you may feel that the trees themselves are breathing. Not the quick, warm breath of an animal, but something slower, almost ancient, as if the entire forest inhales and exhales in time with the turning of the earth. In the silver wash of moonlight, each leaf becomes a vessel of quiet work, its veins faintly glowing in a way your eyes cannot quite see, yet your mind feels it, an invisible pulse moving from the stars above to the roots below. For centuries, people believed that plants simply slept at night, their work done when the sun slipped away. But science now tells a softer, stranger story. The forest never truly rests. Instead, it shifts into another kind of life, one ruled not by the golden sun, but by the pale, patient moon. The leaves, so often thought of as passive collectors of sunlight, are still alive with movement after dark. Under the moon's gentle glow, they draw in oxygen, release carbon dioxide and engage in subtle exchanges of gases and water vapour. Stomata, the tiny pores scattered across the undersides of leaves, do not close completely even when night falls. They remain slightly open like sleepers who stir in their dreams. Through these openings, the forest conducts its nighttime respiration, a process invisible to us but essential to every root, trunk and canopy branch. Scientists studying this midnight life have found that moonlight, even though it is far weaker than sunlight, still shapes these patterns. It's not the energy of the light that matters, but its timing. Like the ocean responding to the moon's tide, plants have their own lunar rhythms, internal clocks that keep time with cycles older than human history. Imagine a single beam of moonlight landing on a leaf high in the canopy. Its photons are weak, barely enough to stir a whisper of photosynthesis, yet the plant senses them. Within the cells of that leaf, molecules respond as if a signal has been received. The night is deep, the air is cooler, the moisture is returning to the soil. This is where the forest's night pulse begins. Water, drawn up through roots and carried along microscopic channels in the wood, slows and pools in the leaves, its flow adjusting to the gentler demand. Some species even show a slight swelling of their leaves at night, as the balance between water loss and intake shifts. This swelling is part of the forest's breath, a physical movement of tissues in response to darkness and light, temperature and humidity, moon and earth. Beneath the ground, this pulse is mirrored. Roots stretch quietly through the soil, not in search of sunlight but following gradients of moisture, nutrients, and faint electrical signals that pass between them and neighbouring plants. Mycorrhizal fungi, those intricate networks that connect tree to tree, become especially active at night, transporting nutrients and water in complex patterns that seem almost conversational. Some researchers have called these networks the Wood Wide Web, but such a term feels too modern, too sharp for something so ancient. Here in the dark soil, under the influence of moonlight filtering through leaves above, exchanges take place in the language of ions and enzymes, in a slow grammar that has been spoken for millions of years. When the air is still, you might notice the smell of the forest changing at night. Volatile organic compounds, released by leaves and bark, drift more freely in cooler air. These scents, sometimes sweet, sometimes resinous, are not for us, though we notice them. They are messages, chemical whispers between plants and insects, fungi and bacteria. Certain flowers time their blooms to the moon's cycle, opening when night pollinating moths and bats are most active. In some tropical forests, researchers have found a correlation between the brightness of moonlight and the volume of these scents, as if the moon itself were pressing the forest to speak more clearly. All of this movement and exchange, this respiration, swelling, chemical signalling, forms what could be thought of as the forest's night pulse. It is slower than a heartbeat, slower even than a breath, yet it is steady and constant. The moon does not create it, but it guides it, the way a conductor guides an orchestra that already knows the song. And like music, this pulse is layered. The leaves have their rhythm, the trunks another, the roots a third. Together they create a harmony that carries through the entire ecosystem. You can almost feel it if you stay still long enough. The air around you seems to soften, the sounds of animals shifting into the background, until you are left with the sensation that the forest is not just alive but aware. Not in the way we are aware with thoughts and words, but in a way that is older and perhaps more complete, an awareness of cycles, of the deep connection between light and life, between the pull of the moon and the chemistry of sap. In this awareness, the forest has no need for haste. Its breath is measured in seasons and centuries, its heartbeat in the rise and fall of generations of trees. From a scientific view, this connection to the moon is part of what's called the circadian rhythm, the internal clock that governs biological processes. In plants, this rhythm is not only tied to the 24-hour day, but also to longer lunar cycles. Experiments have shown that certain species maintain their leaf movements and flowering patterns even when isolated from direct sunlight, responding instead to the subtle changes in moonlight intensity and gravitational pull. This means the forest's night pulse is not simply a reaction to darkness, but a deeply ingrained timing mechanism, one that has evolved alongside the moon's steady path through the sky. Some ancient cultures sensed this without microscopes or data loggers. They planted and harvested according to the moon, pruned trees when its light was waxing or waning, believing that its phases affected the flow of sap and the strength of wood. While modern science may explain these effects in terms of temperature, humidity, and plant hormones, the poetry of the old ways still feels true. The moon and the forest are bound in a quiet partnership, one breathing in response to the other. Standing there in the silver light, you may find yourself wondering, what else happens here while the rest of the world sleeps? What unseen currents pass between the trees? What hidden signals travel from canopy to root, from root to neighbour, from forest to sky? And if we could hear the true sound of the forest's breath, would it be a whisper, a sigh, or something so vast and slow that our human ears could not recognise it at all? The night is long, but in the forest it is never empty. Every leaf, every root, every filament of fungus participates in the ongoing work of life, responding to the moon in ways we are only beginning to understand. The next time you find yourself among trees after dark, pause and imagine that you too are part of this great slow breath. Feel the pull of the moon on your own body, the way it moves the tides within your blood, the way it invites you to slow down, to listen, to simply be. This is the gift the forest offers at night, a reminder that life is not always about growth in the light, but about the patient, steady pulse that continues even in darkness. As the night deepens, the moon climbs higher, its light angling through the uppermost layers of the canopy until only scattered patches touch the forest floor. Each patch seems to shimmer faintly, not because the light itself is changing, but because the leaves above shift in the gentlest breezes, creating a slow dance of shadow and silver. This dance is not only beautiful, it is functional. By altering the way moonlight filters down, the canopy influences the rhythms of the life below. Mosses, ferns, and small seedlings at ground level receive varying amounts of light depending on canopy movement, guiding subtle processes in their tissues. In this way, the forest's upper layers speak to its roots, not in sound but in light and shadow. Inside the leaves, tiny organelles called chloroplasts, so active during the day, are quiet now, resting from the work of photosynthesis. But resting does not mean idle. These organelles still adjust their positions within cells, shifting in response to the dim lunar glow and temperature changes. Some align closer to cell walls to catch every trace of light. Others retreat toward the center to protect themselves. These micro-movements are part of the forest's nightly adjustments, fine-tuning each cell's balance between energy conservation and preparation for dawn. Water too is in constant motion. During the day, it races upward from roots to leaves, driven by transpiration as sunlight draws moisture into the air. At night, with stomata partially closed, the flow slows, but it does not stop. Instead, it redistributes. Water moves laterally between tissues, replenishing cells that dried during the heat of the day, soaking into the sponge-like structures of bark and pith. In some species, nighttime water uptake increases, as cooler air and lower evaporation rates allow the plant to store reserves for the coming day. This redistribution is not random, it is guided by gradients in water potential, a quiet physics that directs molecules to where they are needed most. At the same time, the forest's chemistry changes. Sugars produced during daylight are transported through the phloem, the soft tissue highways that run alongside the sturdier xylem vessels. These sugars feed growing roots, fuel metabolic processes, and in some cases support neighbouring plants through shared root networks. In a sense, the forest spends its nights investing in its foundation. Above ground, we see only stillness. Underground, there is steady construction. The moon's role here is more subtle than it appears. Its light influences the activity of certain plant hormones, including auxins and gibberellins, which regulate growth and flowering. While the full mechanism is not yet completely understood, experiments have shown that lunar phases can shift hormone concentrations in measurable ways. A bright full moon may coincide with increased cellular expansion in leaves and stems, while the darker phases may slow this growth. This creates a monthly rhythm layered atop the daily cycle, a dual clock that keeps the forest in tune with both sun and moon. Some trees, particularly those in tropical or subtropical regions, also time their reproductive cycles to the moon. For example, certain species of dipterocarps in Southeast Asia release pollen or seeds during specific lunar phases, ensuring synchronization across large populations. The result is a sudden, overwhelming abundance that saturates the forest with food for seed predators, ensuring that enough seeds survive to germinate. These events, known as massed fruitings, can transform an entire forest almost overnight. And though much about their triggers remains mysterious, the moon's timing appears to be a key signal. In the animal world, this lunar guidance is more obvious. Nocturnal pollinators like moths, beetles, and nectar-feeding bats navigate partly by moonlight. Their activity patterns shape the behavior of the plants they visit. A plant that depends on a particular moth species might adjust its nectar production to match the nights when that moth is most active, which often correspond to certain moon phases. In turn, this affects seed set, fruit development, and the distribution of future seedlings. The forest's pulse is not just a plant phenomenon, it is a shared rhythm between flora and fauna. Even creatures that are not directly involved in pollination feel this pull. Owls hunt more actively on moonlit nights, and their presence alters the behaviour of rodents, which in turn changes seed dispersal patterns. Herbivores may browse more cautiously under bright moons, leaving certain plants untouched and giving them an advantage in growth. Over time, these patterns influence the very composition of the forest, shaping which species thrive and which remain rare. Standing in the midst of this slow choreography, you might feel as though the forest is aware of the moon's position in the sky at all times. This awareness is not conscious in the human sense, it is woven into the biochemistry of life here. Proteins inside cells respond to light wavelengths unique to moonlight, triggering cascades of signals that ripple through tissues. These signals can affect everything from the opening of a flower to the release of a seed, from the tilt of a leaf to the migration of sap. The quietest part of the night comes just before dawn. The moon, low on the horizon, casts a softer light, and the air holds the last of its coolness before the sun's heat begins to rise. In these moments, the forest shifts again. Stomata begin to open wider, preparing for the day's photosynthesis. Sugars are mobilized toward the leaves, and water pressure builds in stems. The night's stored resources are ready to be spent in the work ahead. It is like watching a sleeper stir, the slow return from dreaming to waking. And yet, even as daylight approaches, the influence of the moon lingers. Plants carry forward the hormonal adjustments, water distributions, and nutrient allocations shaped by the night's light. These changes will guide their growth for days to come until the next cycle begins. This continuity is what makes the forest night pulse so important. It is not an isolated event, but part of a seamless flow that connects one phase of life to the next. There is a lesson in this for us, if we choose to see it. The moon's pull is gentle, almost imperceptible, yet its effects are profound and far-reaching. The forest does not resist it. It moves with it, aligning its inner rhythms to forces it cannot control. In this alignment, there is balance and resilience. Perhaps that is why a walk through a moonlit forest feels so calming. It reminds us that not all change is sudden or loud. Some of the most important transformations happen quietly in the shadows over long stretches of time. So when you next find yourself under a canopy lit by the moon, think of the silver veins in the leaves, the subtle chemistry in the roots, the quiet shifts in the animals moving unseen. Think of the way the forest breathes in time with the moon, how each phase leaves its mark on the days that follow. This is not just the poetry of nature, it is the science of life unfolding in the dark, a reminder that even in stillness, the world is always in motion. When the full moon reigns at its peak and the forest lies bathed in its pale silver, the night breath reaches its most graceful tempo. Every organism, from the tallest emergent tree to the smallest moss clinging to a rock, participates in this shared rhythm. It is not a sound, not a movement you can measure with the naked eye, but a pattern that emerges from millions of tiny processes occurring together. This final part of the forest nocturnal life is where its beauty and science converge most seamlessly, where the physiology of plants becomes inseparable from the poetry of their existence. In the highest reaches of the canopy, where branches sway above the mist, the moonlight filters through leaves like liquid glass. The chlorophyll resting in their cells has surrendered its day-long labour, yet other pigments, flavonoids, anthocyanins, remain quietly responsive to light. These compounds, while often celebrated for their role in protecting plants from harsh sunlight, are also sensitive to the delicate wavelengths of the moon. They act almost like night watchmen, regulating how cells respond to prolonged darkness, maintaining structural stability until the sun returns. Even the cell walls themselves, made of cellulose and lignin, expand or contract with subtle shifts in humidity driven by the cooler lunar hours. Meanwhile, deep inside the trunk, the vascular tissues hum with quiet activity. Xylem vessels, which during the day are highways for water pulled upward, slow their upward stream and turn instead toward equilibrium. In these hours, the forest's internal hydraulics focus on refilling the reservoirs depleted by the sun's demand. The phloem, too, is alive with nighttime commerce, carrying stored sugars from leaf to root, from root to branch tip. Scientists liken this to a long-distance delivery system, but here in the moonlit stillness, it feels more like the forest passing quiet gifts to itself, ensuring no part is left hungry before dawn. Underground, the work is just as intricate. The mycorrhizal networks that lace through the soil continue their exchanges, phosphorus for carbon, water for nitrogen, bridging the gap between species that will never meet above ground. In some cases, an old tree with abundant sugar reserves will feed a shaded sapling through these networks, sustaining it through lean times. This generosity is invisible to us, but written into the soil's chemistry. The moon's gravitational pull, subtle though it is, influences the movement of water in these networks, creating microtides in the groundwater that roots can detect and respond to. The animals of the forest are not passive observers in this scene. Many have adapted their behaviours to complement or capitalise on the forest's night breath. Bats skim low over clearings, drawn to the scent of flowers that open only in the hours after moonrise. Moths trace luminous paths between blossoms, carrying pollen dusted with moonlight from one tree to another. Even predators like snakes and owls play their part by regulating populations of herbivores, indirectly shaping which plants flourish. The forest's rhythm is ecological as much as it is physiological, a network of interdependent actions, each influencing the other. Over centuries, these nightly patterns carve the shape of the forest itself. A tree that times its seed release to a particular lunar phase may find its offspring dispersed farther, carried by winds or animals active in those hours. A plant that opens its flowers to coincide with peak nocturnal pollinator activity may pass its genes more successfully than its neighbours. Slowly, the forest's composition shifts, moulded not just by sunlight and rain, but by the persistent, quiet influence of the moon. Humans too have long felt this pull, even if we could not explain it. In traditional forestry, certain cultures advised cutting wood during specific moon phases, believing it made the timber more durable. While modern analysis attributes this to changes in sap content and moisture levels, the principle remains: the moon's rhythm leaves a measurable imprint on plant structure. Farmers have planted crops, gathered herbs, and pruned orchards by lunar calendars, aligning their work with patterns that science has only recently begun to quantify. As dawn approaches, there is a palpable shift in the forest's energy. The horizon lightens, shadows retreat, and the cool breath of night begins to warm. In the leaves, guard cells around the stomata respond to the growing light, widening to invite in the day's first carbon dioxide. Chloroplasts awaken, moving towards cell surfaces to capture the sun's energy. The phloem adjusts direction, now sending sugars toward developing flowers and fruits rather than storing them. In the soil, roots ease their nocturnal uptake and prepare for the demands of midday heat. The moon, fading into the blue of morning, has finished its watch, leaving the forest ready for the sun. Yet even as the day takes over, the memory of the night lingers in every cell. Hormonal balances set during the lunar hours will influence growth for days, sometimes weeks. The replenished water stores will determine how long a tree can keep its stomata open under a hot sun. Nutrients shared under moonlight will fuel new leaves, strengthen stems, and prepare flowers for pollinators yet to come. The forest does not separate day from night as we do. It sees them as two halves of the same whole, each dependent on the other. To understand this is to realize that moonlight is not simply a reflection of the sun, but a distinct ecological force. It shapes behaviors, influences growth, and weaves its presence into the biology of plants and animals alike. Without it, the forest would still live, but differently, perhaps less synchronized, less attuned to the slower cycles of time. The moon gives the forest a rhythm that is not rushed by weather or season, but paced by a constant companion in the sky. If you close your eyes here, under the last soft beams before sunrise, you might imagine the forest breathing once more, slowly, deeply, in a way that makes you want to match its pace. You might feel the pull of the same forces moving sap in the trees and tides in the sea, a reminder that your own body is part of these cycles. The calcium in your bones, the water in your blood, the patterns of your own sleep, they all carry the same moonlit signature. The forest teaches this quietly without words, in the shifting of light on leaves, in the timing of blossoms, in the stillness that settles between one breath and the next. And as you step out from the canopy into the brightening morning, you carry with you the knowledge that life is not only lived in the daylight, it thrives in the unseen hours, under the silver gaze of the moon, in the slow and patient pulse that has been beating for millions of years. This is the lunar breath of the forest, ever present, ever gentle, ever guiding the life it touches. When twilight surrenders to the first faint glimmers of starlight, the forest shifts into a deeper register, and a softer music begins, one that does not come from the rustle of leaves or the calls of night birds, but from the nearly imperceptible flow of life itself. This is the moment when trees begin speaking in the language of shadows, their conversations carried not by words but by slow exchanges of scent, light and breath. Every forest, whether tropical, temperate or boreal, holds this nightly gathering, though it is invisible to most eyes. To stand in the midst of it is to stand within an unbroken conversation that has been going on for millennia. During the day, a tree's communication is subtle but constant, sunlit leaves producing sugars, roots exchanging signals with fungi, branches creaking under the wind's hand. But at night, when photosynthesis fades into the memory of daylight, other channels open. The stomata, those tiny gates on the underside of leaves, loosen their grip just enough to release trace chemicals into the air. Some of these are byproducts of respiration, but many are deliberate messages, volatile organic compounds meant to attract pollinators, repel herbivores, or warn neighbours of approaching danger. The coolness of night allows these molecules to linger, drifting slowly under the moon's patient watch. Science has learned that these airborne signals can travel surprising distances especially when carried along the gentle currents that move through a nighttime forest. A stressed tree releasing certain terpenes may trigger a defensive response in another tree tens of meters away, long before an insect or disease reaches it. The forest, in this way, behaves almost like a single organism, each tree a cell in a greater body. Moonlight, faint though it is, plays its part here. It influences humidity, temperature, and the opening of stomata, subtly adjusting how freely these messages move. Beneath the ground, the conversation is even more complex. Networks of mycorrhizal fungi stretch between roots, creating living threads that can transfer nutrients and signaling compounds. At night, these networks are busy not only feeding plants but also transmitting the equivalent of chemical whispers, changes in pH, pulses of electrical activity, shifts in sugar concentrations. These signals may help coordinate growth or warn of environmental stress, weaving together species that might otherwise compete. The moon's gravitational pull, tiny but constant, affects the movement of water in soil pores, altering the speed and reach of these underground communications. In the upper canopy, moonlight reflects off leaf surfaces in patterns that change with the wind. Certain nocturnal insects and birds use these patterns as navigational cues, which in turn affects the plants they visit. A moth drawn toward a moonlit clearing may pollinate one cluster of flowers while bypassing another, shaping the genetic future of those plants. Over generations, this interplay between light, movement, and life refines the architecture of the forest's ecosystem. The language of shadows is not limited to chemical and physical signals, it includes timing. Many plants, especially those in dense forests, rely on circadian rhythms that are finely tuned to both day length and lunar cycles. The moon's light, even at a fraction of the sun's intensity, can shift these rhythms by minutes or hours. A flower that opens at night must align its timing with the activity of its pollinators. A seed that releases into the air must match its journey with the patterns of wind and moisture. The moon provides a steady, predictable signal that helps anchor these behaviors. There is a poetry in how science explains this. We might say that plants have photoreceptors, proteins in their cells that detect light wavelengths and trigger internal changes. We might measure the exact nanometers of light that influence a leaf's behavior, but to stand beneath a moonlit canopy and breathe in the cool air is to understand it differently. The forest listens, not with ears, but with every part of itself, responding to the faintest cues in the world around it. This is listening as survival, listening as growth. In some ways, these nightly exchanges are more honest than those of the day. Sunlight creates competition, plants stretching higher, angling leaves to capture as much as possible. At night, when energy cannot be gathered in the same way, collaboration takes a larger role. Nutrients flow from strong to weak, warnings pass without hesitation, and the boundaries between individual organisms blur. The language of shadows is one of mutual reliance, shaped by necessity and honed over millions of nights. If you were to walk through such a forest at midnight, you might notice that it feels different from the same place at noon. The air is heavier, more saturated with scent. The sounds are softer, yet each one seems more distinct. The snap of a twig underfoot, the rustle of something small in the undergrowth, the distant call of an owl. The ground itself feels alive, as if it is breathing with you. This sensation is not imagination. It is the physical reality of countless living processes happening all around you, most of them invisible, many of them coordinated in response to the moon and the absence of the sun. The language of shadows also carries memory. A tree that was attacked by caterpillars days ago may still be releasing deterrent chemicals at night, influencing not only its own leaves but those of its neighbours. A sudden shift in temperature or humidity, recorded in the tissues of leaves and bark, can alter the forest's chemical vocabulary for nights to come. This persistence means the conversation is not just about the present moment, it is about the accumulation of experiences shared and remembered in living form. As you stand still in such a place, you might begin to feel that you too are part of this exchange. Your breath adds carbon dioxide to the air, which a nearby leaf might draw in when dawn comes. The warmth of your body may influence the microclimate around a cluster of plants, however slightly. In the grand scale of the forest, these contributions are small, but they are real. Just as the moonlight touches every branch and every drop of dew, so too does your presence become part of the whole. In this way, the forest at night invites you into its conversation, not to speak, but to listen. To notice the shift in air when a breeze moves through the canopy, to smell the faint sweetness of a flower that will close before morning, to feel the way the earth seems to hold its breath before releasing it again in a long, slow sigh. This is the language of shadows, patient, intricate, and as old as the first leaves that ever turned toward the light of a moon. The night deepens, and with it the forest's conversation grows richer, its language of shadows expanding in range and subtlety. Every rustle of leaf and drift of scent becomes part of a complex, layered dialogue, shaped not only by the creatures that move under the moon, but by the silent forces that govern life here. This is the hour when the coolness of air has settled evenly from canopy to soil, when the moisture rising from the ground creates a delicate veil over every surface, and when the absence of sunlight allows hidden connections to come into sharper focus. The forest in this state is not asleep. It is deliberate, measured, and entirely awake in a way that day does not require. High in the branches, where moonlight filters through in fractured beams, some leaves tilt ever so slightly, adjusting their angles to the faint luminance. This subtle movement, called nyctinasti, is controlled by changes in turgor pressure within the cells at the base of leaf stalks. Even without photosynthesis to drive their daytime hunger, plants shift their posture at night to optimize gas exchange, to reduce water loss, or to capture just enough moonlight to influence their internal clocks. The moon, though incapable of fueling photosynthesis at any meaningful scale, still holds sway through its timing and its spectral composition, signalling the difference between a night half spent and one still young. These movements affect more than the plants themselves. As leaves fold or droop, they alter the architecture of the canopy, changing the pathways of moonlight to the forest floor. Pools of dim light appear and vanish, guiding the movements of small mammals, reptiles and insects that depend on these patterns to navigate. Some moths will only cross open spaces when they see a particular configuration of light and shadow, ensuring their safety from predators. Even the flight paths of bats, who use echolocation more than sight, can be influenced by how vegetation shapes the air currents under the moon. Meanwhile, the air is alive with chemical conversation. Trees, shrubs, and even the smallest ground plants release a symphony of volatile compounds, terpenes, isoprenoids and phenolics that carry meaning far beyond their molecular structure. Some announce the readiness of flowers to be pollinated, others signal stress from herbivores or pathogens, and still others serve as deterrents, their scents unappealing to would-be grazers. The cooler night air holds these molecules longer, allowing them to travel farther and linger in higher concentrations. A single flowering tree can perfume an entire clearing, drawing pollinators from great distances, while an injured branch can send out a warning that mobilizes the defenses of surrounding plants. Beneath the forest floor, the conversation is slower but no less vital. Electrical impulses, travelling at the pace of minutes per metre, pass through the fine filaments of mycorrhizal fungi, carrying signals from one plant to another. These impulses, though faint, can trigger physiological changes, closing stomata, shifting nutrient flows, or altering the balance of hormones like jasmonic acid and salicylic acid. At night, when the metabolic demands of photosynthesis are absent, plants can redirect more resources toward maintaining and strengthening these underground networks. Nutrients stored in roots during the day are exchanged in carefully timed pulses, ensuring that even shaded or struggling plants receive what they need to survive. The moon's gravitational pull plays a role here too, moving groundwater in subtle tides that roots can sense. During certain lunar phases, the slight rise in water table can make moisture more available, encouraging nutrient exchange and root expansion. Farmers who have practiced lunar planting for generations have observed that root crops tend to establish better when sown during specific moon phases, a tradition that modern plant physiology increasingly supports. Above ground, nocturnal animals weave themselves into this web of exchange. Pollinating bats, for example, may follow scent trails released more strongly on moonlit nights, cross-pollinating trees that have synchronized their blooming to these periods. Moths with long, delicate tongues feed from deep tubular flowers that open only after sunset, their activity patterns shaped by the brightness and position of the moon. Even predatory insects, such as certain beetles, time their hunts to coincide with peak pollinator traffic, creating a ripple effect in the ecosystem that influences which plants succeed in reproduction. Predators higher up the food chain feel this rhythm as well. Owls hunt more efficiently when moonlight illuminates open spaces, while some small mammals reduce their foraging to avoid being seen, leaving certain fruits uneaten and seeds undispersed. This interplay between light, movement, and fear shapes the flow of energy through the forest and ultimately affects plant community structure. Over decades, the absence or abundance of certain species can be traced back, in part, to patterns of moonlight and the behaviours it triggers. All of these exchanges, the shifting of leaves, the release of scents, the migration of animals, are carried out in Shilun, at least to human ears. But to those who study them, the forest at night is anything but quiet. Instruments can record the faint pops and clicks of plant tissues expanding or contracting, the electrical whispers moving through fungal threads, the steady hum of insect wings adjusting their pitch to air currents. These are the sounds of the language of shadows translated into something we can sense, fleeting fragments of a much greater whole. And this language is not fixed, it adapts with the seasons. In spring, the night conversations are full of urgency, carrying the signals of growth and reproduction. In summer, they are rich and complex, balancing abundance with the need to defend against drought and heat. In autumn, the chemical vocabulary shifts toward preparation, conserving resources for the lean months ahead. In winter, the dialogue slows but does not stop. Roots and fungi continue their exchanges under frozen soil, waiting for the return of warmth and longer nights. To walk among this is to witness the forest as both an individual and a collective, each plant following its own needs, yet contributing to a shared rhythm. The moon does not command this rhythm outright. Rather, it provides the constant backdrop against which life calibrates itself. Its cycles are reliable enough to serve as a timekeeper, its light steady enough to shape behaviour without overwhelming the darkness. It is this balance that allows the language of shadows to persist, a language built not on dominance but on mutual adaptation. Standing in a clearing under a nearly full moon, you might catch the faint scent of a flowering vine you cannot see, hear the rustle of leaves from an animal avoiding a predator you cannot name. You might feel the air shift ever so slightly, carrying with it the breath of countless living things engaged in a conversation older than humanity. And if you stay still long enough, you may begin to realize that your own senses, dulled by the glare of artificial light and the noise of human life, are themselves back to this ancient frequency. You start to hear the spaces between sounds, to feel the difference between stillness and waiting. You are, in that moment, not merely observing the language of shadows, you are part of it. The final hours of the night bring the language of shadows to its most intimate tone, as though the forest is gathering its last quiet exchanges before the arrival of dawn. Moonlight, now sliding lower in the sky, takes on a softer hue, its silver warmth diffused through the thinning mist. In these moments, the canopy no longer feels like a ceiling but like a great breathing body, arching over the forest floor in a protective curve. The air grows cooler, heavier with the fragrance of flowers that have reached their peak scent, releasing the last of their nocturnal invitations to pollinators before the day silences them. This is when the forest's hidden grammar becomes most noticeable, not in sight or sound, but in the sense that something is passing between every living thing, an unbroken thread connecting root to leaf, insect to tree, soil to star. In the high branches, certain flowers begin to fold, drawing their petals inward as if holding close the secrets of the night. The nectar they offered freely just hours before is withdrawn, and the scents that mark their presence fade into the general aroma of foliage and damp bark. This closing is not an act of retreat but of transition. The plant's chemistry shifts, redirecting energy from attraction to protection. Defensive compounds rise in the leaves, readying them for the herbivores that will soon emerge in daylight. All of this is timed with exquisite precision, guided by internal clocks that have, over countless generations, learned the moon's rhythms as well as the sun's. Lower down, the understory plants are slower to change. Some, adapted to the dappled light that filters through even during the day, remain in a semi-nocturnal state well into the morning. These plants often serve as bridges in the forest's communication, continuing to release certain signals into the air and soil that echo the night's messages into the first hours of daylight. Through them, the memory of the night lingers just a little longer, as if the forest were reluctant to let go of the intimacy the darkness allows. The underground world is also in the midst of closing certain channels and opening others. Mycorrhizal networks slow their pulse, conserving energy for the next night's work. The nutrient exchanges that have been active for hours taper off, replaced by storage processes that ensure each plant has enough reserves for the coming day. Electrical impulses still move through fungal threads, but now their frequency changes, shifting from the collaborative signals of the night to the more self-directed rhythms of daytime growth. These shifts are subtle yet measurable, the biological equivalent of turning down the lights in a room while rearranging the furniture for a different kind of gathering. Animals sense this change as well. Nocturnal pollinators make their final rounds, moving with an urgency absent in the earlier hours. Bats sweep low, gathering what nectar remains, while moths follow fading scent trails to their last meals before retreating to the shadows. Predators use these final moments to take advantage of prey distracted by feeding, creating a brief spike in activity before the first light of dawn disrupts the balance. Even the smallest creatures, ants, beetles, tiny frogs, adjust their patterns in response to this approaching shift, each species playing a part in the forest's slow exhalation of night. The moon's influence, though dimming, remains woven into every movement. Its gravitational pull continues to shape the subtle tides in groundwater, guiding the last sips roots take before the soil begins to dry under the sun's warmth. The angle of its light still casts long, soft shadows that affect how animals move through the forest, influencing which paths are taken and which are avoided. These choices, repeated over countless nights, leave an imprint on the forest floor, shaping trails, seed dispersal patterns, and even the microhabitats where new life will take root. As the eastern sky begins to pale, the forest shifts again, this time more quickly. Leaves open wider, their turgor pressure adjusting to prepare for the heat of the day. Stomata, which had been in a delicate balance between conserving water and allowing respiration, now open fully, ready to draw in carbon dioxide for the day's work of photosynthesis. Sap begins to flow with renewed vigour, carrying the products of the night's metabolism upward. The phloem, which spent hours moving sugars toward the roots, now reverses course, sending energy to developing buds, expanding leaves and growing tips. The forest's internal economy changes direction as decisively as a tide turning. And yet the memory of the night's exchanges is not erased. Hormonal balances established under the moon's light will influence growth patterns for days, dictating when flowers open, how quickly leaves expand and where roots choose to grow. Defensive compounds released in response to nighttime signals will remain active, protecting plants from herbivores and pathogens. The interconnected web of life retains the shape of its nocturnal conversations, just as the surface of a river can carry the impression of a stone long after it has been dropped. For humans, these patterns are often invisible unless measured with instruments or observed over long spans of time. But the forest feels them deeply. The language of shadows is not simply a nighttime phenomenon, it is a way of life, a continuous thread that binds the day to the night and the present to the past. Without it, the forest would still grow, but its rhythms would be less intricate, its balance more fragile. It is in these unseen hours that resilience is built, that cooperation outweighs competition, and that the bonds between species are reinforced. As the first direct rays of sunlight slip between the trees, the moon finally sets, its silver light yielding to the gold of morning. The shadows that carried the night's language dissolve into the brightness, but the message they bore remains within every leaf and root. The forest does not mourn the moon's departure. It knows it will return, and with it, the quiet hours when words are not spoken, but felt, when life moves in slower pulses, and when every living thing is both speaker and listener. Walking away from the forest at this hour, you might carry with you the sense that you have overheard something important, even if you cannot translate it. You may feel the weight of the air still holding the night's stories, the dampness of the ground that fed unseen roots, the faint scent of flowers now closing against the day. You leave knowing that this language will continue without you, night after night, cycle after cycle, under the patient gaze of the moon. And perhaps, if you return, you will find that the forest remembers you too, as another presence woven briefly into the fabric of its shadows. Beneath the soil, far from the shimmer of moonlight and the shifting patterns of the canopy, there is a slower rhythm, one that moves without wind or wing. It is the quiet pulse of roots that listen to the moon. Hidden in darkness, roots navigate a world of stone, water and soil particles, stretching their tips through narrow channels and around obstacles, always seeking what they need, yet never straying far from the signals that guide them. These signals are not only chemical, not only physical, they are also celestial. The moon's gravitational pull, faint compared to the sun's blazing power, still reaches here, shaping the way water moves in the earth and influencing how roots grow. In the stillness beneath the forest, this pull becomes part of the root's silent awareness. Roots live in a world without sight, yet they sense direction with remarkable precision. Gravity gives them orientation, letting them know which way is down, but the moon's cycles alter the behavior of the water they seek. During certain phases, groundwater shifts ever so slightly, rising in tiny tides that the roots can detect through changes in pressure and moisture. These movements are too small for most human instruments to register. But in the delicate membranes of root tips, they are felt as clearly as a touch. The roots respond by adjusting their growth, extending more quickly when water is nearer, slowing when it recedes, ensuring that energy is spent wisely. This responsiveness is part of what botanists call gravitropism and hydrotropism, the abilities of roots to grow according to gravitational pull and toward water. But in the living forest, these processes are not isolated. Roots also listen to the chemistry of their surroundings, detecting traces of minerals, the presence of nearby roots, and the signals of symbiotic fungi. Mycorrhizal networks weave through the soil like threads in a tapestry, connecting tree to tree, shrub to seedling, allowing the sharing of nutrients and information. Some of this information is urgent, warnings about pests or disease, while some is routine, like the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. The moon does not send these messages, but its cycles influence how readily water and dissolved minerals can move through these pathways, shaping the speed and efficiency of the exchange. At night, when the forest above rests from the work of photosynthesis, the roots below are still busy. They draw in water, replenish reserves, and send sugars stored in the trunk back into circulation. In this nocturnal labour, they are aided by the cooler temperatures and higher humidity, which reduce evaporation and allow for more efficient uptake. The moon's position affects not just the tides of distant oceans, but the invisible tides underground, subtly altering the balance of forces that pull water upward through xylem vessels. This makes certain nights, especially those near a full moon, particularly favourable for deep hydration. Some traditional agricultural practices have long recognised these patterns. Farmers planting root crops often choose specific moon phases, claiming better yields and stronger plants when seeds are sown as the moon is waxing. Modern research has begun to find correlations suggesting that changes in soil moisture and gravitational pull may indeed give emerging roots a slight advantage during these periods. In the wild, forest trees may follow similar rhythms, their seeds germinating more successfully when their earliest root growth coincides with lunar conditions that favour water movement. Roots are also listeners in another sense. They detect vibrations. Tiny tremors in the soil caused by animal footsteps, rainfall, or even wind shaking the trunks above, travel through the ground and are perceived by specialized cells in the root tips. Some studies suggest that roots can distinguish between the vibrations caused by flowing water and those from other sources, guiding them toward life-sustaining streams buried deep underground. the moon's effect on these subterranean waters, however faint, becomes part of this sensory landscape, another layer of information in the complex map roots use to navigate. Unlike leaves, which have moments of visible drama in their turning and shedding, roots work in secrecy. They create networks that may last decades, storing knowledge of the soil in their branching patterns and the relationships they maintain. A root system remembers droughts, redirecting future growth toward areas where water was once found. It remembers damage, reinforcing certain paths and abandoning others. And it remembers abundance, expanding in places where nutrients have been plentiful before. These memories are not thoughts, but they are records, biological imprints shaped by years of interaction with the moon's cycles, the seasons, and the unpredictable events of the forest. In the darkness underground, the absence of light does not mean the absence of rhythm. Roots experience their own kind of day and night, governed by the ebb and flow of water, the arrival of nutrients, and the activity of the organisms around them. Worms till the soil, insects burrow, fungi weave their filaments, and bacteria transform minerals into forms plants can use. All of these players respond, directly or indirectly, to the moon. Some microorganisms become more active during certain lunar phases, altering the availability of nutrients and prompting roots to adjust their growth accordingly. In this way, the moon's reach extends not just to the trees themselves, but to the entire community of life beneath them. The relationship between roots and the moon is not one of dependency, but of attunement. The roots would grow without it, but the moon shapes their timing, their efficiency, and perhaps even their resilience. Just as the tides shape the life of coastal ecosystems, these hidden tides shape the life of the forest floor and the vast unseen networks below. If we could strip away the soil and watch the roots in real time, we might see them stretching and pausing in response to the moon's phases, their tips moving like slow dancers in a silent choreography that has been unfolding for millions of years. Above all, roots are patient listeners. They respond to changes that happen over hours, days, and years, not minutes. They measure time differently than we do, marking it in cycles of growth and dormancy, abundance and scarcity, moisture and drought. The moon is one of their oldest companions in this keeping of time, its constant return a reminder that no phase, whether of water, light, or life, lasts forever. In the moon's steady rhythm, roots find a guide through the shifting patterns of their world, a reminder to reach, to adapt, and to hold fast. In the deep hours of night, when the forest above is still wrapped in its silver canopy of moonlight, the soil below is alive with its own muted symphony. Roots continue their work without pause, moving slowly through the earth in ways that seem almost deliberate. Their progress is measured not in meters per day, but in millimeters per week, each extension shaped by the search for water, the pull of gravity, and the whispers carried through fungal threads. This is the realm where the moon's influence is most subtle and yet most constant, a quiet tug on the hidden tides beneath our feet. Water is the lifeblood of these underground networks, and its movement is never random. The moon's gravitational pull, the same force that lifts the seas into tides, also moves water in the soil, though on a scale so small it escapes ordinary human notice. During certain phases, especially the days surrounding a full or new moon, the groundwater level can rise imperceptibly, bringing moisture closer to the upper layers where fine feeder roots wait. These roots respond quickly, increasing their absorption and sending water upward to replenish the leaves and stems above. Even on nights without rain, a tree can drink deeply, its roots tapping into the shifting reservoirs that the moon has drawn nearer. Roots also follow chemical trails in their search for sustenance. Nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium dissolve in water and move through the soil in currents influenced by moisture patterns. When lunar tides pull groundwater upward, they can carry with them minerals from deeper layers, creating fleeting pockets of fertility. Roots sense these changes through specialized cells at their tips, adjusting their direction and the growth rate to intercept the nutrient flow. This dynamic, constantly shifting map of resources means that root growth is never aimless. It is guided by the interplay of water movement, chemical gradients, and the slow heartbeat of the moon. Beneath the surface, the roots of different species often overlap, creating a shared territory where cooperation and competition mingle. Mycorrhizal fungi bridge these boundaries, connecting not just individuals of the same species but entire communities of plants. Through these fungal networks, trees can share carbon, nitrogen, and even chemical signals that warn of danger. Studies have shown that when one tree is attacked by insects, it can release compounds into the soil that travel through the mycorrhizal network to neighboring trees, prompting them to produce defensive chemicals before the threat arrives. The moon, by influencing soil moisture and temperature, can alter the speed and reach of these underground communications, giving the network a different rhythm depending on the phase of its cycle. Nighttime is particularly important for this hidden exchange. Without the demands of photosynthesis, plants can allocate more of their energy to root activity and nutrient transfer. Sugars produced during the day are moved down into the roots, fueling growth and feeding fungal partners. In return, fungi deliver essential minerals, completing a trade that benefits both sides. The cool air above helps reduce evaporation, while the steady pull of the moon aids in drawing water into the root zone. It is a time of quiet abundance, when the forest's underground economy is most active. This subterranean world is not without its challenges. Soil is a crowded place filled with bacteria, invertebrates and other plants, all competing for the same limited resources. Roots must navigate around stones, avoid areas with harmful pathogens, and adapt to sudden changes in water availability. The moon's cycles can bring both relief and stress. Rising groundwater can deliver much-needed moisture, but it can also create conditions favourable to root-rotting fungi if the soil becomes too saturated. In this way, the moon is not merely a benefactor, it is also a force that demands adaptation and resilience. Over time, these cycles shape the architecture of root systems. Trees that grow in areas with pronounced lunar water movement often develop deeper, more extensive root networks capable of tapping into moisture during dry spells. Others, in wetter environments, may spread their roots wider to capture the fleeting nutrients carried upward during certain phases. These adaptations are not conscious decisions, but the result of countless generations responding to the same subtle signals. The forest's very structure is, in part, a reflection of its long relationship with the moon. Above ground, these underground patterns manifest in ways we might overlook. A tree's ability to produce flowers, fruits, and seeds depends on the nutrients and water supplied by its roots. Years of favourable lunar cycles can lead to strong growth and abundant reproduction, while disruptions, whether from climate shifts, human interference, or prolonged drought, can echo upward, reducing the forest's vitality. The health of the canopy, the diversity of species, and even the songs of birds in the branches are all tied, however indirectly, to the invisible work of roots listening to the moon. The science behind this connection is still emerging. While farmers and foresters have long worked by lunar calendars, modern research is beginning to uncover the physiological mechanisms that could explain these traditions. Instruments now measure minute changes in root growth rates, water potential, and nutrient uptake, revealing patterns that align with lunar phases. It seems that what was once dismissed as folklore may in fact be a reflection of biological reality, a reminder that ancient observation often captured truths long before science had the tools to prove them. In this way, the forest floor becomes a place where old wisdom and modern discovery meet. The roots do not know the names we give the moon's phases, nor do they follow a calendar, yet their lives are shaped by its steady turning. The pull they feel is not mystical but physical, a force woven into the fabric of life on Earth. And yet, when you consider how these hidden movements sustain the towering trees above, how they influence the birth of flowers and the migration of animals, it is hard not to feel that there is something poetic about it. If you could place your ear to the ground in the deep of night, you would not hear the roots speaking in any language we know, when you might sense the faint hum of their work, the shifting of water, the stretching of fibres, the slow pulse of life moving through soil. You might feel the same steady rhythm that guides the tides, that pulls at the oceans and the groundwater alike. This is the music of roots listening to the moon, a song that has been playing for longer than any human memory, and one that will continue as long as the Earth and its companion share the same sky. As the night thins toward dawn, the roots' slow and steady work begins to shift, their listening now tuned toward the coming change. The moon, hanging low in the western sky, is no longer a pale overseer high above, but a companion nearing the horizon, its gravitational influence unchanged, yet its light fading. Underground, the patterns set in motion hours earlier continue with the same measured grace, for roots have no haste, no sudden leaps, only the patient unfolding of their purpose. The moisture drawn upward during the night's lunar tide still lingers between soil grains, feeding the fine root hairs that are busy pulling it into the plant's vascular system. Even as the air above begins to lighten, the soil holds onto the deep darkness, allowing the roots to continue their work in calm secrecy. This is the hour when the underground world feels most complete in itself. The traffic of nutrients between roots and fungi continues in a gentle hum. Sugars carried downward from the day before are traded for minerals gleaned from the soil. Phosphorus for flowering, nitrogen for growth, potassium for stability. These exchanges are not random. They follow the needs of the plant as dictated by season, health, and environment. During the cool hours before dawn, with evaporation at its lowest, the efficiency of this trade is at its peak. The moon's gravitational tug on groundwater adds to this efficiency, ensuring that even the finest root tips remain well supplied for the day ahead. Above ground, the leaves are still and the branches motionless, but the changes in the roots are already shaping what the canopy will do once the sun rises. A tree that has drawn abundant water during the night will open its stomata more freely in the morning, allowing for faster photosynthesis. Another, having replenished its nutrient stores through deep root contact with fertile soil pockets, will channel that abundance into new growth. Even flowers still closed in the pre-dawn coolness are being prepared by hormonal cues that originated in the roots, influenced by the cycles of water and moonlight below. The networked nature of the forest's underground life means that one tree's success can spill over to another. Through mycorrhizal connections, a well-supplied tree may share some of its stores with a struggling neighbour. These transfers often happen at night, when there is less demand for immediate growth above ground. The moon's phases influence the ease and volume of such exchanges by shaping the moisture conditions in the shared soil. During waxing moons, when gravitational pull encourages upward movement of water, these nutrient gifts may travel farther, reaching plants that would otherwise remain isolated in poorer soil. As dawn approaches, some roots begin to slow their uptake, not because the need has passed, but because their work will soon be complemented and partly replaced by the day's photosynthetic process. The sugars they will receive from the leaves later in the day will provide fresh energy for continued exploration underground. But the guidance of the moon remains written into the day's activity. Roots that have stretched farther during favourable lunar phases continue to explore, sometimes breaking into entirely new soil zones that will serve the plant for years. Those that have mapped rich nutrient paths hold on to them, reinforcing their structure and building the plant's long-term resilience. The cycles of the moon are not only about the nightly rise and fall of groundwater, they also create patterns across weeks and months that roots seem to follow. After several cycles, the soil's nutrient profile shifts in response to patterns of moisture, microbial activity, and organic decay. Roots that listen to these changes over time adjust their architecture accordingly. Some thicken to anchor the plant more firmly against storms, others spread wide to take advantage of brief but rich patches of fertility. This adaptation is gradual but constant, the result of unbroken observation by living structures that never stop sensing. For humans, it is easy to overlook this hidden world because it does not clamour for attention. The forest floor gives little indication of the vast activity below, except in moments when heavy rain loosens the soil or the fall of a tree reveals its root crown. Yet everything we see above, the arch of branches, the flush of green, the flowering and fruiting, depends on this invisible labour. Roots listening to the moon are not merely supporting structures, they are the quiet architects of the forest's future. The science explaining these processes grows richer with each study. Sensitive instruments placed in forest soils can detect minute changes in root diameter across lunar cycles, suggesting that water uptake and storage vary with the moon's pull. Chemical analysis of root sap shows fluctuations in nutrient content that correspond to moon phases. Even the rate of new root tip formation appears to follow subtle rhythmic patterns, hinting at a deep biological clock that aligns with both the sun and the moon. Such findings confirm what generations of close observers, farmers, foresters, and gatherers have long intuited, that life beneath the soil is in tune with the same skybound forces that shape life above. As the first light of day seeps into the forest, the roots do not stop their work, they simply adjust. The gravitational influence of the moon will persist throughout the day, but its effects will now blend with the stronger rhythms of sunlight, heat, and evaporation. Roots will shift their priorities toward deeper zones where moisture remains cooler and more stable. They will continue to draw in nutrients, though at a pace balanced with the demands of the leaves and stems above. The night's abundance will be slowly distributed upward, powering the day's growth and preparing for the next cycle of lunar-guided renewal. The forest, in this way, never truly sleeps. It only changes the nature of its activity, turning from the lunar breath of the night to the solar drive of the day. Roots remain the constant, listening both to the steady pull from above and the shifting conditions below. They measure time not in hours, but in phases, not in days, but in cycles. Every full moon, every new moon, every waxing and waning is a note in the long song they follow. If you were to walk here at dawn and place your hand on the forest floor, you might feel nothing at first, only the coolness of the soil, the dampness of dew. But stay long enough, and you might begin to sense that this stillness is alive, that beneath it there is movement too slow for your eyes, yet certain and enduring. You might realize that the trees around you are anchored not just by wood and bark, but by a relationship with the moon that has outlasted countless generations. And as the sun rises fully, you would leave knowing that tonight, when darkness returns, the roots will again lift their faces toward the unseen tides and listen, as they always have, to the quiet guidance of the moon. In the stillness of night, when the moon sits high above the treetops, the forest does not only breathe, it speaks. It speaks to the stars in a language so slow and soft that it is felt more than it is heard, carried not by wind or rain, but by the invisible threads of light that travel between earth and sky. This is the forest's midnight conversation with the stars, a dialogue written in the chemistry of leaves, the rhythm of opening flowers, and the measured expansion and contraction of living tissues in tune with celestial patterns. While the sun dictates the urgency of the day, the stars bring a different kind of guidance, one that works in shadows and silver, influencing life not through sheer force but through quiet constancy. At first glance, it may seem strange to think of trees and stars as conversational partners. The stars are unimaginably far away, their light often taking thousands of years to reach us, while trees are rooted in the soil, bound to a single place for their entire lives. Yet both are bound by the same cosmic clock, both subject to the rotation of the Earth, both responding in their own ways to the shifting positions of the moon and planets. The forest's nightly rhythms are tuned not only to the moon's gravitational pull, but also to the subtler changes in starlight air temperature and atmospheric pressure that accompany the turning of the heavens. Plants are not blind to the night sky. Within their cells lie photoreceptors, proteins sensitive to specific wavelengths of light. These include phytochromes and cryptochromes, which detect red, far red and blue light. During the day, they respond primarily to the sun, but at night they remain alert to the faint glow of the stars and the reflected light of the moon. Though far too weak to drive photosynthesis, these photons still provide information. They help plants calibrate their circadian rhythms, synchronize flowering, and even adjust their leaf movements. In this way, the forest reads the sky like a book, absorbing its patterns and translating them into growth and timing. The air itself changes under starlight. With the sun gone, temperatures drop, humidity rises, and air currents slow to a whisper. This stillness allows scents to linger, carrying chemical messages farther and more consistently than they can during the turbulence of day. Many plants take advantage of this, releasing volatile organic compounds into the night air to attract nocturnal pollinators. Some flowers open only after sunset, their pale petals reflecting moon and starlight to become visible beacons in the dark. For these plants, the stars are not just distant ornaments, they are part of the stage lighting for their nightly performance. This nightly activity is not random. It follows predictable cycles shaped by both the lunar month and the sidereal day, the time it takes for the Earth to complete a rotation relative to the stars. While the difference between a solar day and a sidereal day is only about 4 minutes, over weeks and months this shift changes which constellations rise at which times, subtly altering the backdrop of the forest's nocturnal world. Animals that navigate by the stars, such as certain migratory birds and insects, pass overhead or through the canopy in patterns influenced by this shift. Their arrivals and departures affect pollination, seed dispersal, and even the timing of certain flowering events, tying the forest's life to the slow rotation of the heavens. The forest's connection to the stars is also chemical in origin. Cosmic rays, high-energy particles originating from distant stars and galaxies, constantly pass through the Earth's atmosphere. While most are deflected or absorbed, some reach the surface, influencing the formation of ions in the air. These ions can affect plant physiology, altering processes such as seed germination, water uptake, and the activity of certain enzymes. Though the effect is subtle, it is ever present, another quiet thread in the ongoing conversation. Even the soil participates. Under the cover of night, the cooling of the ground releases stored heat back into the air, creating microclimates that affect the behavior of insects, fungi, and microorganisms. These small changes ripple upward into the plants themselves, influencing how they allocate resources between growth, defense, and reproduction. The stars, by dictating the timing and length of the night, play an indirect role in shaping these microclimates. Longer nights mean more time for nocturnal processes. Shorter nights compress them, forcing more activity into fewer hours. Some indigenous traditions speak of the forest and the stars as kin, born from the same origin and bound to one another through cycles of light and darkness. In these stories, the stars are said to watch over the trees, guiding their growth and protecting their roots. While modern science explains the connection in terms of light wavelengths, gravity, and atmospheric chemistry, the heart of the observation remains the same. The forest responds to the night sky as much as it does to the day. Standing in a moonlit clearing surrounded by towering trunks and the faint rustle of leaves, it is possible to feel this connection. The branches seem to stretch upward, not only for light but in a kind of reaching toward the stars themselves. The stillness becomes a kind of listening, as if the forest is waiting for some cue from above before continuing its next movement. And perhaps it is. Perhaps there are signals we do not yet understand, patterns too faint or too slow for our current instruments to detect. What we do know is that the forest's midnight conversation with the stars is ongoing, unbroken by the absence of human witnesses. Whether under a canopy of tropical rainforest or among the sparse silhouettes of boreal pines, the trees keep their vigil, turning their unseen senses toward the constellations and planets. The messages they send and receive are written in the silent language of biology, physics, and time, a language older than our species and likely to outlast it. This conversation is not meant for us, and yet we are part of it. The oxygen we breathe at night is the product of photosynthesis carried out during the day, but its availability is shaped by the respiration and gas exchange that continue after dark. The rhythms that govern plant growth influence the crops we eat, the materials we use, the very climate we depend on. In this way, the quiet dialogue between forest and stars reaches into our own lives, whether we notice it or not. And so the forest speaks on, sending its signals upward in the form of reflected light, released scent, and faint electromagnetic patterns, while receiving in return the steady, ancient light of the stars and the unseen particles they send our way. It is a conversation without beginning or end, measured not in words but in the slow turning of the earth, the rise and fall of the moon, and the shifting of constellations in the sky. To listen is to slow yourself to the pace of trees and to understand that the forest's midnight voice is as constant and enduring as the stars themselves. As the night stretches on, the forest's conversation with the stars deepens, becoming more layered and intricate. By this point, the moon may have drifted lower in the sky, allowing more of the canopy to fall into shadow. yet the stars remain constant, steady points of light scattered across the heavens, each one carrying messages that began their journey long before the first leaves of this forest ever opened. The air has cooled further, and in the stillness, every leaf, flower and tendril seems to lean into the silence as though listening for something precise and rare. If the forest could speak in a human voice, it might say that this is the hour for sharing secrets. Above the tallest branches, stars spill their light in wavelengths so faint that our eyes barely register them, but the forest's photoreceptors can. Phytochromes detect the balance between red and far-red light, a ratio that changes subtly with the angle and intensity of starlight and moonlight combined. Cryptochromes, more sensitive to blue light, remain active throughout the night, helping plants maintain their circadian rhythms. Though we often think of circadian cycles as tied solely to the sun, they are also fine-tuned by the presence or absence of celestial light sources at night. These signals, though weak, act as calibrations, minute adjustments to the internal clocks that guide flowering, seed germination and growth direction. On cloudless nights, when the atmosphere is clear, more starlight filters down, bringing with it an even more ancient form of communication: cosmic radiation, high-energy particles born from supernovae and distant galaxies enter the Earth's upper atmosphere, colliding with molecules and creating showers of secondary particles that sometimes reach the surface. While invisible to us, their influence on ion formation in the air can subtly alter the microclimate of the forest. In certain experiments, shifts in these ion concentrations have been shown to affect plant growth rates and even the opening and closing of stomata. In the quiet darkness, this interplay of cosmic and terrestrial processes becomes part of the forest's nightly exchange. The animals too join in this conversation. Many nocturnal species use the stars to navigate. Migratory birds, even those too young to have made a journey before, can orient themselves by the rotation of the constellations around the North Star. Insects such as dung beetles have been shown to use the Milky Way as a guide, moving in straight lines across open ground under its glow. Their movement patterns bring them into contact with certain flowers or fruiting plants, facilitating pollination or seed dispersal in ways that are tied, however indirectly, to the visibility of the stars. On nights when the canopy opens wide to the sky, this celestial guidance becomes a part of the forest's function, shaping who visits whom and when. Meanwhile, in the soil below, the absence of direct sunlight and the cooler temperatures of night encourage certain microbial processes to flourish. Some nitrogen-fixing bacteria are more active under these conditions, converting atmospheric nitrogen into forms plants can use. These bacteria are sensitive to moisture levels, which in turn are influenced by the length and temperature of the night. The stars, by defining the duration of darkness, indirectly help set the pace for this work. A long, cool night under clear skies may mean a surge in nutrient availability by dawn, a quiet gift from the unseen chemistry beneath our feet. The constellations themselves change with the seasons, bringing different nightscapes to the forest. In the dry season, certain star patterns might rise earlier, signalling to animals and plants alike that a shift is coming. Some flowering events have been observed to coincide with these seasonal star changes, suggesting that the forest uses them as cues alongside changes in rainfall and temperature. For indigenous peoples living within these forests, the stars often serve as both calendar and compass, guiding the timing of planting, harvesting, and ceremonial events. These human traditions are, in their own way, extensions of the forest's dialogue with the sky. And then there is the matter of timing within the night itself. The sidereal clock, the Earth's rotation relative to the stars, ticks slightly differently than the solar clock, completing its cycle in about 23 hours and 56 minutes. For the forest, this difference means that the position of a given star at a given hour changes gradually over the weeks. While imperceptible to most casual observers, it can matter to species that use the stars for orientation or timing. These shifting patterns might influence when certain nocturnal pollinators emerge or when some plants release their scents, creating a dynamic interplay between celestial movement and biological response. In this long, unhurried exchange, the forest is not merely a passive receiver, it sends its own signals upward. The water vapour released through transpiration rises into the atmosphere, carrying with it trace organic compounds that can influence cloud formation and local weather patterns. These compounds, caught in air currents, may rise high enough to interact with the upper atmosphere, where they are touched by the same cosmic particles that began their journey across galaxies. In this way, the forest becomes part of a feedback loop, its own breath joining the larger rhythms of the planet and the cosmos. What makes this dialogue remarkable is its persistence. Whether the night is warm or cold, wet or dry, moonlit or shrouded in clouds, the conversation continues. The cues may shift in tone, more reliant on chemical signals in one condition, more on visual cues in another, but they never cease entirely. The stars are always there, even when hidden from sight, their gravitational influence and electromagnetic presence seeping into the fabric of life on Earth. Standing within this quiet exchange, you might sense that the forest's attention is divided. Part of it turned inward to its own processes, part of it stretched upward toward the infinite. The stars do not dictate what the forest must do, but they provide context, a slow and steady frame of reference within which all else happens. For a tree that may live hundreds of years, the slow drift of constellations across the centuries is just another part of the landscape, as constant as the rise and fall of the moon. To understand this connection is to see the forest not as an isolated ecosystem, but as a participant in a planetary and even cosmic network. Every breath of air, every drop of water, every particle of soil has passed through cycles shaped by the stars. Life here is built on ancient starlight, on atoms forged in the hearts of suns that died long before Earth existed. The midnight conversation is not simply about the present moment. It is a remembering of origins, a quiet acknowledgement of kinship between earthbound roots and distant fires in the sky. And so the dialogue continues, night after night, in wavelengths too faint for human eyes, in particles too small for human hands to catch, in cycles too long for human lives to measure. The forest listens, the stars shine, and between them flows a conversation that began long before we were here to witness it, and will go on long after we are gone. In the final hours before dawn, the forest's conversation with the stars becomes quieter, more contemplative, as though both earth and sky are aware that the time for their nightly exchange is coming to an end. The moon, if still above the horizon, has dimmed into a gentler glow, its silver mingling with the faint blush that begins to rise in the east. The stars, though still sharp to the eye, now hold a different quality, less the dominant presence they were in the deep night, more like silent companions watching the forest prepare for the shift today. This is the moment when the conversation turns inward, when the messages exchanged are less about action and more about remembrance. The trees, still anchored in the cool embrace of night air, carry within them the imprints of all they have received during the hours past. the subtle calibrations of their circadian clocks, fine-tuned by starlight and the moon's presence, remain encoded in the chemical messengers moving through their cells. Hormonal balances influenced by these cues will guide the opening of flowers, the timing of leaf expansion, and the release of pollen in the days to come. Even in the silence, the stars have left their mark, shaping the forest's internal schedule in ways that will unfold long after they fade from view. The animals sense the change as well. Nocturnal pollinators make their final visits, guided by scents that are beginning to diminish. Bats skim the edges of clearings, seeking the last blooms before retreating to roosts. Moths, whose pale wings catch the last of the starshine, begin to descend toward resting places hidden under leaves. For these creatures, the waning presence of the stars is a signal, a shift from feeding and travel and concealment. Their movements in turn shape the forest's future, determining which flowers were pollinated, which seeds will be carried, and where the next generation of plants may take root. Above, the constellations wheel slowly westward, their positions altered just enough from the night before to mark the passage of time, to a tree that has stood for centuries. This slow drift is part of a long memory. Each season brings a slightly different arrangement of lights. Each year, a repetition with subtle variations. Over decades, the forest experiences the stars not as fixed points, but as travellers with their own unhurried journeys. This gradual shifting is mirrored in the forest's own life, where growth, decay, and renewal follow a similar pattern of change with inconstancy. The soil, too, holds on to the night's conversation. Microbial activity that peaked in the cool darkness begins to ease as the air warms, but the nutrients released during these hours remain in place, ready to be drawn upward by roots. Water held in the upper layers of soil, pulled subtly by the moon's influence, will soon begin to sink again under the pull of the sun's heat. But for now, it remains accessible, a parting gift from the night. The forest knows to take advantage of this brief overlap, when the last benefits of night coincide with the first energies of day. There is a rare stillness in these moments, not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of transition. The stars are fading, but their work is not undone. Their light has travelled across unimaginable distances to reach this forest, to brush against the leaves and bark, to be absorbed by the photoreceptors in cells smaller than grains of dust. That light, though faint, has altered the balance of life here, nudged growth in one direction, opened a flower a little earlier, delayed the closing of a leaf by a heartbeat. The forest, in turn, has released its own contributions into the night air, scents, moisture, and particles that now rise into the upper atmosphere to join the greater cycles of wind and cloud that circle the globe. For humans, this conversation is almost impossible to measure in its entirety. We can track the position of the stars, measure the wavelengths of light, even observe the molecular changes inside plant cells, but the full scope, the way all these effects combine, ripple through species, and echo over years, is too vast for our brief lifetimes to grasp. The forest's conversation with the stars is not an event, but an ongoing relationship, one that has been shaping life here for as long as the forest has existed, and will continue for as long as both earth and sky endure. As the first streaks of sunlight cut through the eastern canopy, the stars vanish from sight, but not from influence. Their absence is temporary, a pause in the dialogue until the Earth's rotation brings them back into view. The forest accepts this pause without urgency, for its rhythms are built on the certainty of return. just as the moon will wax and wane, just as the seasons will turn, the stars will reappear and the conversation will resume. You might imagine that in this final moment, as the night breathes its last and the day takes hold, the forest is holding on to the memory of the stars' presence. Not in words, not in thoughts, but in the quiet arrangements of its own living systems, in the alignment of leaves, the subtle readiness of flowers, the poised stillness of seeds waiting for their time. All these are echoes of what the forest has received from the sky. And so the stars set, leaving the forest to its daylit work. Photosynthesis will dominate, driven by the sun's energy. Pollinators will change, scents will shift, the air will warm. Yet somewhere beneath the bright surface of the day, the influence of the night's conversation lingers, like the aftertaste of a dream you can't quite recall but still colours your mood. Tonight, the stars will return, and the forest will lift its senses toward them again, ready to listen, ready to answer in its slow, deliberate way. The dialogue is endless, and in its constancy lies the deep truth of the forest's life, that it is not only of the earth but also of the sky, shaped equally by the light of the sun and the distant fires of the stars.